Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to Launch Week and our first webinar, What's New for the Web version 16.2, presented by Web Program Manager Mehul Harry and DevExpress Technical Evangelist Don Wibier. In today's session, learn about the new products and features shipping for our web platforms. See the ASP.NET Scheduler and Grid View improvements, new web dashboard control, DevExtreme Angular 2 support, and more. This session is being recorded and it will be available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Mehul and Don.
Hey, thanks very much, Amanda. Good morning, Don.
Hey, good morning, Mehul.
All right, Don, so we got a lot to show in the What's New 16.1. We're going to attempt both ASP.NET and DevExtreme, and specifically, you're also going to show something from reports and dashboards. So we got a lot. Are you excited?
I'm totally set, so let's get started.
Let's just dive right in. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to show you everything that we can for What's New in 16.2 for ASP.NET, DevExtreme, and also, I mean, we have so many things available for the web, so dashboard and reporting too. So let's just dive right in with our flagship control, the DevExpress ASP.NET Grid View. And for ASP.NET, we've added some useful end user, what we call experience enhancements. So what that means is that in essence, these aren't features necessarily for us as developers, web developers, but I think it's things that your end users are really going to get a kick out of. Now, you may have seen a lot of this stuff if you've got our newsletters and beta announcements. So a lot of what we're going to cover you might have heard about, but we wanted to kind of give you firsthand experience and how it might be useful. So if you've installed the beta, now I won't lie, Don and I probably have a more recent version of the beta, and you're all thinking to yourself, when is it coming out? Hey, it's coming out soon, and you know our CTO's on the webinar, so you can barrage him with those questions as well. But in essence, for the ASP.NET Grid View, we've added certain things that take our server-side control, which is great. It's got callback capabilities and all that good stuff, but now we've added a lot of client-side interaction. The world is moving to the client side, so a lot of people are asking us, hey, can we do this on the client side? Can we do that? So whenever possible, we try to do this. Now, granted, this is a web forms and MVC control, so what we did is we asked ourselves, what can we do on the client side? So we did something, for example, like column moving. What we realized in the previous versions, we would take a column like this, and I drag it.
Mehul, I'd say, okay. Mehul, can you please check if your screen is unpaused, because nothing is showing?
Yes, thank you, Don. I wanted to keep everybody on their toes, like what's actually happening behind that slide. So I apologize, y'all. Thanks, Don. So now that you can hopefully see my screen here, we've got the 16.2 demos, and here in the grid view, I've got this column moving demo. It's a new demo that we added, and as I was saying, when in previous versions, if I take a column and I drag it around, you can see I've got a marker. So if I let go, it would do a callback, and then it would refresh just this content of the grid. But now we were able to figure out that you don't need to go back to the server. And this keeps the user experience for your end users nice, because now they're just looking at this feature and they're saying, oh, I can move around a column and nothing's happening except my grid is behaving exactly as I want it. Now, this is just one of the many features. Now, one of the things we introduced when we got this feature was a new column move mode. What that means is before, when we moved a thing around, I can just simply move it what we call among its siblings, because these are all at the same level. But now we've got this feature called through hierarchy. Now, to really understand this, you have to look at the bands feature. But when we do through hierarchy, this now says, listen, I no longer want to move it just among the siblings. When I move it, for example, here, you can see I went from these vertical arrows to these horizontal arrows. So now when I drop units in stock, it's now at the same level. Now I made units in stock the parent to product name, and now I can move category and product name under units in stock. I am now essentially creating bands by moving columns, and that is super powerful. So I think it's one of these features your end users are really, really going to like.
Now, hey, Mehul, is is this being done without any postbacks or callbacks, but just rendered on the client?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's not going to be for everything. We can't, completely change around a server-side control, but where possible, we have introduced it. So, for example, we've also done it for this resizing columns. So now, typically, if you go to resize a column right now, you can see this is what we call live resizing. So I'm actually resizing the column as I move it back and forth. Now, if I wanted to, I can use the new postponed mode. And what this does is when I grab this column here and I start to move it, you can see here, if I can show you here, I've got at the bottom right there the capability to do to see the width of the pixels. Now, as I move it, you can see exactly where it's going to end up. So now when I click and let go, it resizes the column. And that's all done on the client side. So once again, it's just these nice little features. Now, Don, we've also got this data cell bands. As I said, because we introduced this column move mode, we have improved how people are moving columns around. So when we first introduced this feature, people liked the bands, but they said, look, your WinForms grid, the bands are grid in it. I can take a column and I can move it anywhere. But previously, you couldn't take beds, for example, and say, look, I want to put beds under photo. I want to put bats under photo. And you couldn't create a whole new hierarchy. Well, now you can. So once again, these are some nice features. Now, Don, we've also done something with batch editing. What happened with batch editing in the grid view?
Oh yeah, that's a feature that I like a lot, but we have improved it a bit because of some customer feedback. One of the things is that if you delete a row in batch editing mode, it's gone normally. But with 16.2, you'll see that it will stay in a disabled state on your screen. So if you accidentally removed one, you can just recover it and get it out of the batch before you apply the updates to the server.
Right. So now you get a visual notification. Your end users, before, like Don said, it just disappeared, which is fine. Some people prefer that, but we like to give you and your end users options. So this, I think, is a really nice visual cue because you're batch editing, which means I'm selecting a bunch of random rows that are going to be deleted from the database. So if you want to tell your end users, hey, listen, yeah, previously we had the save changes and cancel changes, but you didn't actually know which rows you were going to delete. Well, now you've got this where in a disabled state, so you also know visually specifically which ones are going to be gone, and you have the opportunity, or the end user has the opportunity to grab them back. So you're right, Don. I'm completely with you on that. Now, Don, we also did something for accessibility in this release.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the previous release, we already had complied with Section 508 and WCAG, as well as YAREA when browsing the grid. But with 16.2, we did a couple of additional things here. So we also added accessibility features when doing batch editing mode, header filter pop-up, page size selectors, and even in callbacks. So what that means is that if you have a screen reader, it will give you information when you enter batch edit mode or when you do all those specific non-grid related actions, basically.
Right, and so let me bring up the web version of our demos as well. And you can find these at demos.devexpress.com. Now, these new demos are, the ones that I'm running are local, so you won't find them. And the reason I want to show you the current one on the web is because, as Don mentioned, we have supported Section 508 and, Don, I don't know how you pronounce that, but I'm going to call it WCAG and YAREA or YAREA, whatever it's called. But you can actually test this with your, let's say, a reader like Wave. For example, certain users with disabilities require this. So especially, I think we've talked about it in the past, for this particular theme, we recommend you use the default theme because it has some specifics for the end users. But in this release, as Don just mentioned, we've done certain things to completely comply. And so I think the story goes is we have a couple of really big customers, and they said, look, your support is good, but it's not complete. And so I was happy when they called us out on it because they worked with us to improve it. So I want to thank those customers because now our support is much better now. And again, also thanks to Julian and Paul who work with those customers to get us this info, and now we're completely supporting it. So if accessibility is important to you, and a lot of organizations it is because it's a required feature, then you'll be happy to know we've got that. All right, Don.
I can tell you something else about this. Because the grid view is based on the same code base as the card view and the vertical grid, those controls have those features enabled as well.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for updating that, Don, because not only is the grid view, the card view, and a couple of our editors as well. So across the board, as much as possible, because of our reuse, a lot of the accessibility features are there. Okay, next, we're going to talk about the scheduler. Now, Don, in the last release, I mentioned that we had some improvements, but really the story is that starting at the early beginning this year, we wanted to update our scheduler. Now, the scheduler, this is the current scheduler right here. It's from 16.1, and it looks nice. It's performant enough and so forth, but we wanted to make it not just more performant, but we wanted to update its look and how certain user things work. So I talked a lot about this in a blog post, but we did a lot of things where we did UI enhancements, where we changed the look and the layout, but we also changed the performance because a lot of things started to happen on the client side. So not only did we change how the scheduler gets JSON data back and forth with the server, but we changed, for example, how the markup is produced for certain things like the appointment dialogues and so forth. The end effect was in previous versions, for example, you can see here just rendering one of the scheduler controls. In previous versions, we had a larger kilobyte size, and now in this release, not only is it smaller, but it's also going to give you better update time, response time, and so forth. And then we also added. So let's just take a look. So here, one of the key things you'll notice is from upgrading from 16.1 to 16.2, you'll see the appointments have a slightly different look to them. And I like it. I think it's a slightly more modern look, but also it's going to feel a little bit faster because of those enhancements. So for example, if I grab this and I move it around, this is happening on the client side. And it isn't until I let go that, and you just saw a small flash, that an update went over to the server. So once again, where possible, we're trying to upgrade the end user experience with our ASP.NET controls because we know a lot of our ASP.NET customers just love the functionality and features of these controls, and we just want to make sure that we are keeping these up to date and light and fast. Now, Don, we also added a couple features in this release. For example, we've added this header and date time highlighting. So if I had a ton of appointments and I said, okay, well, I got an appointment at the hospital here, I'll know that it's on Wednesday and exactly where in the ruler it's from. So it's from 2 to about 3:30. And it's, once again, it's a quick visual thing, but it's these small items like this that will also improve the end user experience. And one last thing, Don, I want to mention about the scheduler is we've added this thing for the resource header layout. Now, I believe we did this with templates, right, Don?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So now I know you are a big fan of templates, and as am I. So every time a template is made available to us as developers, it basically gives us more control over the look and functionality of that control. And we have extensive amount. So once again, this new approach allows you to really define how the end user experience is going to be. Now, for those of you interested, we have added some API improvements to the client side as well, for example, with selections and so forth. So definitely take a look at the scheduler because once again, we started this work at the beginning of 16.1. Some of those changes kind of creeped into 16. In the last release, but it isn't until this release where we kind of wanted to make a full announcement that the scheduler is more performant, has a more modern look to it, and it just feels great. So I definitely recommend, if you're using the scheduler, upgrade to 16.2. Okay, Don, what's happening with our spreadsheet control?
Yeah, we've done a couple of enhancements there as well. And I guess the first one to mention is we have done again some work on the performance of the spreadsheet.
Right. And that's a good point. So let's bring that up. Now, before we jump into it, I think you can take a look if you got this access to this what's new. If not, when we release, which is very soon, you can go to devexpress.com/new and you'll get all this information about the latest release. Now, I did a blog post on this, but in the what's new is some charts as well. So Don, like you mentioned, we've improved the page render size, but we also improved things like the command execution. Now, these kind of improvements have resulted in the spreadsheet not only just executing faster, but loading faster as well, because kilobyte size has been reduced, page render size has been reduced. And a lot of this work just comes from, refining with each release, going back and saying, okay, what can we do to improve this bit or that bit? And, now that the spreadsheet is a much more mature control, we've got these items in there. Now, in this release, we've also done certain things. Now, I should mention, in my blog post I mentioned this thing, and this is a useful tip in general, not just for the spreadsheet, but for a lot of controls. If there are features of a control, let's say of the grid view or the spreadsheet or the scheduler, if you don't need a certain end user feature, don't use it, disable it, because what that will mean is it will improve the functionality of that control, because we're not going to render as much elements and so forth. So in general, that's just good advice. But in this specific release, what we've done is we've added a new format cell dialog. Hey, Don, I know you're a big fan of Excel, so are you familiar with the Excel's format cells dialog?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the previous release, we already had like a dialog which looks pretty similar to it. But, well, as you mentioned, we have improved it quite a bit. So you can also specify things like cells, backgrounds, font colors, and styles, and you can change the content alignment, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So now it's exactly the same, basically, as the formatting dialog in Excel.
Right, and if you're familiar with that dialog from Excel, you'll be happy to know we've made it available. It's a new dialog, so if you're in a cell, and let's say I want to change how calories is displayed from a standard number. Now, we have options here, for example, under number, that lets you say, I'm going to make it a percentage and so forth. But as Don mentioned, if you want to get granular, if you want to have control, you can click, I forgot, there's a word for this little icon here, but if you click on that little icon there, it brings up this dialog, and currently it's formatted as a number, but I can come in here and say, look, I want to make it a fraction, or I want to make it a scientific number, a date time, whatever you want to make it. So once again, you have granular control over exactly how your item will be displayed. So for example, if we go for a mask here, I can define a custom mask and it'll just update that number. All right, we've also done certain things. Now, we've mentioned in here, but we now give you the capability to create custom functions via the control, meaning that if you can program in custom functions into the control. We already gave you pretty extensive control over how many functions are available, but now you can get even granular control over and say, I want to make a custom function for a particular cell. Now, Don, we've done certain things for end-user restrictions. What do we do in this release for end-user restrictions?
Yeah, we have enhanced that end-user restrictions a bit, and in this release we have extended the end-user restriction in a worksheet. So you can now add additional restrictions on the worksheet for inserting and deleting objects, or sorting and auto-filtering.
Nice. Okay, so what you're saying is we had this worksheet protection, and if you're familiar with this feature in Excel, which just says, look, I made this Excel sheet and I'm super proud of it, but I don't want my end users to come in here and start changing certain numbers of these charts. So you were able to define exactly how to protect the worksheets, and now we've extended that. because we didn't have everything that, for example, Excel's worksheet protection has, but we've now extended that support for things like cells or editing objects and so forth. And you, the developer, have full control. So you can say, look, I want to allow them to edit objects, or I want to allow them to format columns, and you can get granular in that support. All right, that's fantastic, Don, and I think this spreadsheet control, if you're a fan of our Office controls, you'll be happy to know. Not is it just more performant, it's more feature-rich. All right, Don, what do we got for the HTML editor? Because I know you're a big fan of cloud services.
Absolutely. And remember that we introduced the cloud features in the file manager some versions ago.
Right.
So you could manage your Dropbox account or your Azure account, stuff like that. Well, after the file manager, we introduced the same functionality with the upload control. So you'll be able to upload files directly from the workstation into the cloud. But we still didn't manage to implement it in the media dialog of the HTML editor. And
okay.
Yeah.
What?
So with this release, we are actually able to configure the media dialog in a way that we want images to be automatically uploaded to, for instance, Amazon or Dropbox or Azure. It's just a matter of setting a couple of properties.
Right. Okay. So let me see if I can summarize. You're telling me that we had these features in our upload control, and because we reuse our own controls, the upload control is used not just in the file manager, but in the HTML editor, wherever we upload functionality. And because we enabled cloud functionality within the upload control, we've now bubbled that feature up. And it's available, and now it's available through our HTML editor as well, where it wasn't before. Okay, so that's a nice feature. And what is this about this binary image upload you were mentioning?
Yeah, that's also one of the things that we have improved a bit. With the previous versions, we already enabled the drag and drop. So if you would insert an image in your HTML document, you could actually drag it in. But that would be base64 encoded inside the HTML, so you would get a bit of HTML bloating there.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, that's really not cool. So what we've done now is that it will actually be uploaded and stored as a file on the server, and a proper link will be inserted in the HTML. So the way it should work, basically.
Awesome. All right, so you're telling me that this makes complete sense. This is exactly how I would expect it to work. When I drag and drop an image into the HTML editor, now it's going to take this binary image, and instead of creating and if you're not familiar with the base64, previously base64 looks like base64 code, but in essence it would be all embedded, and then now your HTML went from this little bit to, let's say, 3 times or 4 times that size. So while that's useful in certain cases, maybe for small images that you don't want to go back to the file system to load, in this case, I don't want to store certain images as base64. I want to store these on my file system on the web server. So this is I'm taking it from my client browser, dropping the file, it's uploading directly to my web server to a location I specified. All right, so that's fantastic. And be sure with a lot of these that we're explaining, we created new settings. For example, allow save binary image to server. And by default, we'll disable things because we don't want to surprise you or your end users to think, oh, something broke or changed, right? So be sure to update your end users and let them know, hey, we've got a new feature in this, for example, CMS we've got or something like that. So, all right, Don. Now we've done some updates for full page. Now, I want to quickly show you this. Previously, now with full page edit mode, you can actually, let's see. We can show you a good example of this. We wanted to kind of show you how full page edit mode works. And in the HTML editor, you can use either the standard toolbar or you can use that ribbon control. But with the full screen mode, you've got this new feature now that allows your end users to go completely full screen into the browser. All right. Now, Don, beyond the HTML editor, we've also done some work for the editor control. Now, the editor has this customizable item appearance list. Now, while I bring up the demo, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is not only, I mean, you saw the combo box right now, but it is also applicable for the list box and any other list control, basically. If you want to have like an image like what you're seeing right now, you can customize a template which will be used to display the contents of this particular item.
Right.
So you
So,
can format it.
So as you mentioned, you're saying that anything that has the list appearance, for example, a combo box, list box, token box, we can use the item template. Now, for example, here we're overriding the item template, and within it, I've got custom HTML that says, look, not only get the name, but we'll get the address and the email and a photo URL, all that good stuff. The end result is now our drop-downs don't have to look just like I've got a list of names. I can get a very rich display. I think that's super slick. So it's these little changes like this in your UI that kind of delight our customers, right? So I think that's also useful. All right, Don, let's take a look at charts. Now, tell us what's happened with charts. Please.
Yeah, we've done a number of visual improvements on the charts as well. And the best way to show you the differences is by first showing you the charts from 16.1. And what you see here is a really nice chart. On the right side you have like the little crosshair item, the crosshair element, which tells you what you're looking at. But what we have done in the 16.2 is that we are actually placing it on top of the chart, and if you take a look here, you'll see that you have it right nicely fitted in the chart, and it gives you a bit more screen real estate for the chart. And yeah, it doesn't have that empty column on the right side anymore.
Right.
And that's not the only thing that we did here. I mean, you can also change things like the font. You can use anti-aliasing, and what you see here is like a bit more complicated explanation of what you're looking at. And again, we're now putting it right on top of the chart with 60.2, so it will not use as much screen real estate.
That's very nice. Now, what's this about? Here, let me remove this image here for a sec. What's this about API improvements for MVC charts?
Yeah, we had some valuable feedback from some customers, and if you would like to initialize a chart with MVC, you had to explicitly cast specific properties in the configuration object to specific types. We have made that a bit more easy, so you don't need to cast the series to a specific bar chart series and so on. So it makes it much easier to configure the chart, and it's more readable in your code.
Awesome. Okay, so talk to me a little bit again, because continuing with these cloud thing. What's with the file upload control?
Yeah, the file upload control obviously uploads a file to the server, but yeah, that happens in chunks of data. So if you have a web form where several servers can handle your requests, that might cause a bit of issues. So we have made sure that if you are using a web form like multiple instances on Azure, that the upload will still go okay and you'll have the file in the end.
All right, that is excellent. Now, let me talk a little bit about this feature, predefined themes customization. I think this is really cool, and I'll probably explain it further in a blog. But we have upgraded how themes are, how you work with themes in this release. So let's take, for example, our grid view, and I'll go to, let's say, the live data or something like that here. Previously, you saw we've got all sorts of themes. Now, a lot of what I'm going to mention today won't apply to some of the older themes, but the newer themes, for example, like Moderno, iOS, Mercurial, I've mentioned in the past that you can take our newer themes, use our excellent theme builder tool, and change the base color and the base font. Well, we've gone a little bit further and said, okay, instead of just changing it through the theme builder tool, which requires you to save it as a theme, import it into your project, we said, well, let's just make them as options. So now we have built this in. So for example, let's say, for example, let's take a look at data cell bands here. Let's say I like the Metropolis blue theme, but I want to change the base font. So now we've made these as options in that you can modify through web config. That means you can change them dynamically. You don't have to recompile a theme, which is great. So for example here, this is Metropolis blue, and I can say, look, I want to change it from orange to, let's say, some purple, or I can even come and say, look, I don't like the thing. So for example, instead of the orange highlighting, I've got this color. And I can also say, look, I don't want to use Coda, I want to use Segui UI. And on the fly, I'm changing the font, which means you can as well through web config, which means you can also expose this for your end users. And you're not limited to the fonts that we're mentioning here, the colors we're mentioning here. You can define other colors or fonts as well. Now again, this is particular to the more modern themes where we can do this. All right, very cool feature. Now let's talk the other web platform that's huge for DevExpress, and that is DevExtreme. Now these are our client-side controls, JavaScript-based controls. They don't run server-side at all, which means they're a completely different animal. But a lot of our customers, said to us, yeah, but we love the feature set and the functionality, which is why they come to DevExpress, and the themes. So you'll find a lot of these, while they're not one-on-one, you'll find a lot of the same great features like, in the grids and the schedulers and so forth. Now, in this release, Don, we had a lot of customers come to us and say, look, this thing Angular, that's what I use. I know you've got DevExtreme has a framework, and it's great. So, when we first released DevExtreme, it had its own sort of framework, the routing and layout and all that good stuff. In fact, the current version of this site is kind of built with that, right? Because, it supports mobile and web. But really, for the last more than a year, actually, we've been working to what we call make the controls widgetized, which means you can use them in any platform. And you can see this in our demos. So in this particular release, we've gone further and we said we have official support for Angular 2. And Don, are you a fan of Angular?
Well, absolutely. It's one of the most exciting frameworks out there right now. So yeah, it's totally cool.
It's huge. It's an Angular 2. A lot of people were waiting for this release. And so we already supported Angular 1. And Angular 2, we were just waiting for the official release. Now, it's out. Now, and we've done some particular things. So I won't go into it too much. But in this particular release, we've got Angular, we've got Webpack and Angular CLI, command line support. Now, I'm going to do a webinar on it later that I'll get into this and explain what this is. But this Angular CLI is kind of like file new. So if you remember in Visual Studio, there's a file new that helps you get started. Angular CLI is a similar thing. And Webpack, we've done a whole webinar on Webpack before, but in essence, it's a module technology. So, Don, we've also done something for DevExtreme validation. Now, why is that important with Angular?
Well, if you take a look at our JavaScript controls, we have some really nice and really cool validation on our own controls, but it might happen that you want to use like a standard control or maybe another control which doesn't have the nice validation features that we have. So what you can do now is you can actually use our validation system on another control which is not from DevExtreme and still have that validation rules set up like you do with our controls.
That's awesome. So you can use our widgets, our validation rules, along with Angular. Now, I'm sure some customers are going to be worried like, wait a minute, what what exactly about Angular, the question always comes up is, are you going to do this the right way, right? And what that means is each framework has an approach to how they, for example, data bind or how they, do routing and so forth. And that's why I said the work we did to make our controls widgetized, it wasn't easy. We had to redo a lot of internal code, but it led to improvements and all that good stuff. But it makes it now that if you're using jQuery, if you're using Knockout, if you're using Angular, Angular 2, you can rest assured that you're going to be binding the way that you would expect it in those frameworks. And we've added specifically new configuration components. And what this means is that if you are binding, there's a couple of ways to bind, right? There's what we call deep binding using properties, or there is binding using markup, sort of the declarative, sort of old style approach. And we figure most people are probably going to, for example, with Angular, you're going to want to go with deep with the properties. So what that means is if you take a look at Angular here, Angular RC. Well, we're calling it Angular, and I'll explain RC in just a second. But if you take a look at the app component HTML here, you can see that our widget is rendered, and I've got the properties listed the same way you'd expect in Angular. So if you're familiar with Angular's components and service and all that sort of stuff, which I'll explain in a separate webinar, you'll be happy to know that we've got deep binding the way you'd expect from Angular. But of course, you have the second option as well. All right, with that done, let me just kind of say that this is available in 16.2. However, and this is the caveat, that a couple of items in this release, only 2 for DevExtreme, is not available exactly in that first release that most people are going to get, which is 16.2.3. Is not going to include, basically the first release that we put out, which is going to be very soon, is not going to include the final version of Angular 2. It's going to come out with what we call the release candidate. And the reason for that is we're still putting a couple of finishing touches, and we're getting a lot of feedback from customers about, hey, this works or this could be improved, and we're taking on that feedback and making it that much better. And again, Angular 2 is fairly new as well. So we're going to make the final version in the next minor release of 16.2, which is likely going to be 16.2.4. So if you're wondering when that is, well, our minor releases are typically a few weeks after the first release comes out. So we don't put them right back to back because it gives us, just like you, a cycle to add code changes, retest, all that good stuff. Okay. Don, what's happened for the data grid in DevExtreme? I know you're a big fan of this. You with the remote paging and the cloud services, I'm sensing a theme here, Don.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is just my cookie, and we have done a couple of things in the data grid to improve paging and grouping on the data grid. And one of the things what happens right now is that if you want to use paging and grouping, a lot of nodes or records are being retrieved from the backend, and they will be used, they will be sorted or grouped by the JavaScript engine of your browser. But I mean, if you've got a lot of rows and quite a bunch of data, it might be more efficient to have the paging and the grouping be handled by the backend instead of the client. So we have made a couple of changes in the API which allows you to perform those grouping operations. And what happens, what you see on the page, that is as soon as you expand one of those grouped nodes, it will fetch only those records from the server. So yeah, we are distributing the load of the grid basically.
All right, so it just makes our if you've got a grouped data grid, and let's say you can keep it collapsed, which makes more sense, but as you expand, that's where it's going to go and get it. So we've optimized remote paging for a grouped data grid, which is already fairly light and performant. Now, we've also done some toolbar customization, and let's see, I believe we've got a demo of it here somewhere. Now, if you're not, by the way, you're probably wondering, why does this site look different? And that's because we are updating the site as well, and the new demos still have this great search feature. So if you're ever curious, like, how do I find a particular feature? For example, I'm looking for toolbar. I just type toolbar in here and said, oh, it's under templates right there. So it's a really nice, I mean, we have so many demos, so you can actually easily go and load this. Now, I really like this, Don. You know why? Because not only do we got a snazzy, and by snazzy I mean like a very cool looking toolbar, but it's functional. So I'm changing the way the grid is grouped here, and watch that, the count updated. So it's a really slick little feature, and you can customize this as well. So as you can see here, we've got this event for toolbar customization on toolbar preparing that lets you jump in and define and say, look, I want it to look like this, I want it to have a count, etc., etc., etc. Or I want to add a special button that does expand all or collapse all. So it's a really nice, slick little feature that you can define exactly what your toolbar looks like, and it manages your grid. Now, this is really cool, Don. We've done some improvements for the row selection. Now,
yeah, that is a cool one.
Yeah, it's kind of a sort of a small little thing, but I was impressed with it. And let's see if we can kind of show it here. I believe it's under, let's just do a search for it, selection, and there's a couple of things we've done. Now, the first one I talk about is what we call deferred selection. Now, deferred selection basically says that right now, if I uncheck a row, if there was an event on that on selection item, it would update the grid. Well, now with this new deferred selection, I can actually make changes to selection and not update the grid until I invoke it with a special button. So in this case, once I hit the get selected, get statistic on the selected task, because I have nothing selected, it updated my counts. Now, if I go and select those items and then click the button, it'll go and update it. So it's a nice little feature that'll let you see exactly how that works. Now, we've done some improvements as well for multiple record selection. Now, previously, when you selected, you had, when you did all pages, basically it went and selected for all pages. Well, now we've got a new mode that lets you say, I want to do it just by page. So for example, previously, because it was on all selection, it would go and do the entire grid. Now when I unselect this, I've only unselected for this page, and you can see this has not been updated. Now, we've done some other improvements for selection as well, which we'll show in just a second. But again, the DevExtreme data grid continues to get better. Now, Don, what's happened with ECMAScript here?
Well, ECMAScript is the JavaScript standard, and one of its features is the internationalization object to support multilingual sites. And DevExtreme now uses this to localize its resources in different cultures, basically.
Got it. Okay, very cool. If you got it, if you're doing internationalization, we are now supporting the ECMAScript standards. And along the same line, just a short note, we are supporting jQuery 3 now. jQuery 3 was a big change for jQuery, which meant a lot of work for us, but you'll be happy to know jQuery is out there. We're supporting the versions. Go ahead and get started with it. Now, tell me a little bit about remote data processing. Is this like the optimized paging for the grid, Don?
Yeah, this is basically pretty much the same as what we saw on the data grid. Some expensive operations like grouping, sorting, that kind of stuff is also available for the pivot grid. And you can perform those operations now on the server as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So let me just make sure I got this right. And if people, to kind of give good context to the backstory, when we first started making this client-side pivot grid, the question was, how do we make it? Do we make it where we just render, but we do some work on the server side? Do we make it a completely client-side object, right? Well, really, the answer is, you can't run everything on the client side, right? Because let's say you've got a large amount of data, you don't want to be calculating this stuff on the client side. And so in this release, we're optimizing it where you can delegate certain intensive operations. Like if you've got a large amount of filtering or grouping or summary calculations, you know what? You're gonna bring down the browser. So instead, do that on the server side, which is where it makes sense. The server side is more performant. And then just send back the changes. So once again, it's a really awesome feature. This makes our pivot grid even more performant. All right, let's talk a couple of things with the scheduler done. We've updated our support for the scheduler. So now the scheduler can do some interesting things. So let's bring up, let me do scheduler here. We've added some improvements to the cell templates. You can now customize the cell templates and add things like these little background icons and so forth, but it's great. We've talked about how templates are so useful and they're available in our client-side controls as well. But in essence, they give you full control of how it looks. And we've done some improvements to the view customization. So each individual view can now be defined. So for example, you can see on work week, I can define the appointments to have a certain set of colors and versus a certain set of colors for the different items. And this gives you more control over how you want to define the end user's look and feel. Now, this is the one we were talking about earlier, Don. Let's talk quickly about the selection item keys. By item keys, the scroll view and the tree views load on demand. So we're going to run through this. We're running out of time here, but basically talk to me a little bit, Don, about this tree views load data on demand.
Yeah, well, again, that's a bit in the same line as the pivot grid optimizations and the data grid. To improve the end user experience when dealing with a lot of nodes, we can actually now load child nodes on demand. So while you're expanding a node, you can actually fetch the child nodes which surrounded there, and you can see that by the loading indicator. So it's to get a better user experience.
Nice. All right, and we've updated our scroll view widget as well. Now, scroll view basically says I have some content I need to scroll through. Now, we've improved the performance of the scroll view that you're going to get even on a non-native device. What that means is, for example, if I was running this on an iPad, the native scrolling might take over, which is great because you're getting as performant as possible. Now we've improved the scroll that even for non-native content, non-native devices, you'll get some great performance out of that as well. Now we've improved our selection item by keys, which basically means we allow you to select items in code by the item keys, and it's a useful little improvement. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the DevExtreme MVC wrappers. If you aren't familiar, these are basically our DevExtreme widgets. We took all these widgets, we created a new set of MVC controls, ASP.MVC controls. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to show customers, there are certain customers out there that said, listen, we know DevExpress has a great set of MVC controls, and you can learn about them by going to devexpress.mvc. And we're going to be updating this page to kind of tell you that we have a new set of MVC controls. And these are available in 16.2, but similar to what I said about Angular, they won't be in the first one. The first one will be a release candidate, but they will be in the next minor release. But I'm excited about this. We're getting a ton of feedback because there's a lot of customers use ASP.NET. And we have done some small improvements, but once we get the final version, that's when I'll really kind of talk again about the wrappers. But I invite you, if you are an ASP.MVC fan, then you will like these controls because they basically are client-side controls. So there's a lot of client-side features. You can connect to Web API. We actually have a great data binding story for these controls. So take a look, and they will be available soon. Now, Don, let's wrap up and talk quickly about what's happened with reporting for DevExpress. So Don, go ahead and keep the screen. Let me just see if I can talk what Don is showing here. So Don, we've lost your audio, but we have your video, and so let's see if we can talk a little bit. We've added a mobile viewer for the reports control. So your web reports now can render on any mobile device. And that's fantastic, right? Because they're HTML anyways, and I did a whole webinar about this where we showed how to do this, but now it's built in. That's fantastic. And if you want to test it, when we release this, you can sort of scan that QR code from your device and see this rendered. Now, oh, that's a great feature. Now, Don's showing here at the bottom, there's also a couple of buttons. When you touch the report, you can export it to any of the formats that we support. And we also supporting the search functionality within the report as well. So where you're going to get a great amount of granular control. And not only can you search within the report, so if you got a long set of items and you're on a mobile device, you can quickly find it. So when Don types in a certain term, it's going to go and find it within the report.
Yeah.
Now,
my
there you are, Don.
Yeah. Okay, so that is, I think, one of the most exciting features here. Another thing that we have improved is the data source wizards that we have in the report designer, and that one allows you to assign or to create several queries in one go. So if I go here to this one and I want to edit this particular master detail relation editor, so this is one of the improvements that we did. You are now actually able to set up the relationships in this data source wizard.
Very nice, very nice. And there's some improvements to the data source wizard as well, right? So your end users, the power users who are creating these reports on the web, are going to feel more empowered because now they have even more control.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that we should point out is something concerning dashboards. We've done a couple of things there as well. One of the things that we already released is the web dashboard designer, and we are now officially releasing that in 16.2. It used to be a release candidate. We made a couple of changes there, so let me switch over to this dashboard viewer, because we have combined the viewer and the designer in one control if you compare this with the release candidate that we already have. So what that means is you'll just drop this thing on your form and you set a couple of properties, and once you say edit this dashboard, it will switch over. As you can see, you'll have a whole bunch of indicators here, and you can just start editing all the specific indicators on the dashboards. So I think that's one of the things which is also pretty nice to have released. Mehul, I think that you want to take a last word on Visual Studio 2017.
Yeah, just keep that link up. Basically, for the early adopters, you know, they're excited about the next Visual Studio. Visual Studio 27 RC has been released. You know, we are supporting this, so you can actually start using DevExpress with it. However, there are things to be aware of. So if you want to read about them, Julian's got a great blog post that lists all the possible issues. Take a look at that link, and it'll direct you to his blog post, or just go to devexpress.com/blogs, and you'll see it there as well. But in essence, yes, go ahead and try it if you're interested. But I just kind of want to mention that within the 16.2, just to kind of wrap up, for ASP.NET, we've done some great performant things for our server-side controls by adding client-side features. So not only does it feel better for the end users, but it's also more performant for like the scheduler, for the spreadsheet. So take a look at our changes for ASP.NET. And for DevExtreme, this framework has gone from, you know, being a framework to just a great library of widgets that you can use with Angular or jQuery and Knockout. And I know there's people out there thinking like, what about React? Hey, you know, we're looking into that as well. So there's the library is constantly improving, and the web story is great. And you saw, for those customers who want a full thing like a dashboard, we've got a great solution there as well. And reporting continues to improve as well. All right, Don, thank you very much. And let's just hand it back to Amanda. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. We really appreciate it. Amanda, we got any questions?
Yeah, can you guys see the question panel?
Yes.
Okay.
So I
A lot of them
will
have been
skip.
answered behind the scenes, as you can see.
And so I'll start with the first one. George, it would be great if we could have the same sort of data source wizards for hierarchical grid. Thank you, George. We will note that, and we will pass that info over to the reports team and, investigate it for futures. Have you moved the show hiding of the edit button on a dashboard to a setting instead of having to add HTML style? That's a good suggestion, Greg. No, but we will absolutely talk with the dashboard team about it. Is there a roadmap on things getting added to the dashboard designer? Heinrich, the man to ask about roadmaps is Julian. But no, in all seriousness, it's probably, if it's a useful feature, we're absolutely going to consider adding it. So tell us your roadmap. What does your ideal roadmap look like? Send it to us and let us know, and so we can, discuss it and see how it fits along with the overall plans. And Mark, thank you. We appreciate you joining us. Questions about XAF, web and mobile? Oh, XAF is doing some interesting things for web and mobile that you should absolutely be looking at, and I recommend XAF has a Facebook, but the XAF team is very easy to reach, so just shoot us an email, info@DevExpress, and we'll connect you with them, and they can tell you directly what's happening. All right, dashboard demo link, Don. Is there a dashboard demo link you can show?
Once we have updated the site, when we release, you can actually play around with it.
Awesome. So,
or you can download the beta version yourself, because I was running it from my local machine, so it's in there. If you download the beta, you'll have the dashboard designer.
Good point. So download 16.2 beta, and you have access to the same thing Don and I were showing. And for those asking, last couple of questions, is this webinar available? Yes, we have a YouTube channel. So go to YouTube, type in Developer Express or DevExpress, and you'll find us. And Amanda edits these webinars, posts them, make sure we all sound smart. And yes, there's also a trial. Please go to devexpress.com/trial. Is there a trial of 16.2? If you're a customer, yes. So obviously that makes sense, right? Because this is all beta RC stuff, and we figure customers are the ones most likely interested. But yes, free 30-day trial with access to our excellent support team, which you guys can ask them questions about how to do something. We have so many resources, samples, code projects, videos. We'll point you to them. Kirsten, Aurelia, great question. Yes, it's a question we get quite a bit. There are, and I'm not lying, there's so many frameworks, right? What about this framework? So it's on it. Honestly, if you were to ask me right now, React is probably more on our radar than Aurelia, but that doesn't mean we're going to count out any particular framework. We are actually doing changes with DevExtreme that is going to allow it to probably be easier. So for example, even if we don't support it, it's going to kind of make it easier for others to take a look and say, oh, okay, I think maybe I can get that working. So I mean, on Twitter, people have been asking me about frameworks I've never heard of, and they're all good stuff. They all provide their own unique way, for example, of routing or binding or something like that. So 16.2, it's coming, and I don't know what voice input means, but somebody asked. But anyways, our emails are right there. We're on Twitter as well. So please come reach out to us. We love hearing from customers. We love hearing about our feedback. We love seeing how you're using this stuff. And with that, Amanda, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mehul and Don. All right, everybody, like I mentioned before and like Mehul mentioned, today's webinar will be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. And I did post the actual link to our channel in the chat box. Our next launch webinar is this Thursday, What's New for Windows, presented by DevExpress CTO Julian Bucknell and DevExpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. It will also be at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right, everybody, that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Mehul and Don. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.